This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 5th of May, 2024. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
And we're back again, and I don't want to sound like the embittered social media addict, but our very first topic last week was how a video got banned, a podcast video, for a violation of YouTube's policies. I wanted to do a follow-up to start up, and hopefully we won't take 45 minutes discussing it tonight like we did last week, but I do want to follow up with what has happened since then. I had said last week that my thought was they would look at the video, they would see what was going on there, and they would go ahead and restore it. I have a similar thing happened for another video, which they went ahead and restored. However, what their response was after a thorough review from our policy team, unfortunately, your video won't be reinstated. We understand this wasn't the outcome you were hoping for, but please review our policy on harassment and cyberbullying to avoid this in the future. And of course, I asked, all right, well, then what was the part that was the violation of the policy? Oh, and by the way, what policy was it? Because the original email said it was, dangerous conspiracy theories that might provoke violence or promote violence. And the new one is a violation of cyberbullying and harassment. And so I said, that's just stupid. Your content moderation policies are applied neither rationally or fairly. And I am not going to take the offered training on a policy that they don't even enforce rationally. Because if I take the training, they would remove the warning from our channel. But currently we have a 90-day warning. So we're on super secret academic probation on YouTube. So anything else, any other warning, anything else will now count as a strike against our channel. 3 strikes and you're out. But as I point out, of course, we have fallbacks. There's Twitch, there's Rumble, there's Locals. We have other things. And I think at the beginning, we even had a discussion, didn't we? That, we would see how long this thing lasted on YouTube.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm surprised it's lasted as long as it has. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that irks me, there are 2 things that irk me. A, they won't tell you specifically what policy you violated.
Right.
And B,
or what specifically violated.
And B, that was what I was coming to. What violated it? So what's the policy that was violated and what violated it? As you can see, I received no response to any of those questions.
And they do shove us down. Like if you look up Observations Podcast, you get lots of hits, but none of them are us. And
that is true.
It's hard to, I have friends who ask me, and they find out I do a podcast. I'm like, really? Oh, that sounds really cool. And they want to listen to it. So I have to send them the link because I can't just have them go search for it. Actually, you can search for it on Google and at least find the audio version. But YouTube shoves us way down. And Google does the same thing. It's very pernicious, and it's in bad faith. And I kind of feel like I want to threaten them with a breach of contract type of action. But again, once you get caught up in it, it's hard to disentangle.
Well, not only that, but Alphabet is
how much of a chance are you actually going to change their minds?
Alphabet is a multi-billion-dollar company. They'll walk into federal court, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It's impossible to have the resources to fight them unless you have, deep pockets yourself, which neither one of us do. So the thing that irks me is the contract that you sign, your terms of service or whatever they call it. I think it's terms of service is what they call it. It is specifically designed to be unfair. It's specifically designed to give them every advantage, and whatever decision they make, they have plenary power to tell you that you have violated their policies. They don't have to tell you what violated it. There's no when we think about legal stuff, we think about due process, but there's literally no due process of any type here. You're asking to,
and there doesn't have to be. They're not required to have that.
no,
However, here's what I would like to know. If we're demonetized and have warnings and all this other stuff, are they still using our metrics to generate ad revenue? Are they still the people who visit? Are they monitoring those people and using their information? If so, then they're in breach of contract because they're not fulfilling their end to provide us a forum.
Yeah, well, their response would be, well, we haven't removed you, but we have no
right.
we have no obligation
because they still want to use your information. That's my whole point.
Yeah, it's a very frustrating situation because they know that you have no power to come back to them. They don't have to give you any information, which is the other thing, which you'd think if they were serious about their terms of service, that in order to prevent future violations, they would be much more clear about how the policy was violated. And the fact that they refused to answer what violated the policy, what the specific policy was, because they've given me 2 different policies, and they've never given you an idea of what it was that you actually said that violated those policies, it tells me that they simply don't care.
Yeah, they're perfectly happy to squash little bugs. And that's what we are. We're a little bug.
Yeah. So that's the situation. That video is gone, and it is gone forever on YouTube anyway. Of course, and I probably should have brought this up prior to, and I can actually show you the video. I'm half tempted to actually play the offending part on Rumble.
Just which part was offending?
Yeah, they gave me
I know they sent you some clips.
They didn't give me some clips. They sent me a timestamp, and the timestamp they sent me was when I was reading directly from the opinion. So that was the timestamp, and that was the screenshot that I showed last week. So on the podcast itself, and Rumble doesn't make it easy to find your podcast, although I am following, but I can actually show you which one it was. If we go to screen share, and we have to go back 9 months to find it. So we have to go back pretty far to find it. And I believe it is this one right here. Not worth the effort. That was the one that is banned off of YouTube. It was a short one. I was on alone. And so whenever I did this one, oh, well, hold on. Didn't want that. So let me kill the sound on there. So if we go to the timestamp where they said it happened, it was at 3:50. And if I play it, I'm liable to get this pulled off here. But this is where we were. I'm literally reading this highlighted text on the screen. And then I continue to read more stuff. So I don't know how this is a violation of their terms of service, other than, the text, overthrowing the liberty of the nation and other text that was brought in there inside the opinion. But it's just the weirdest thing. And there's no explanation for it. It's arbitrary. It's capricious. It's run by AI. I mean, there's no human who ever really looks at this. And even if you contact Team YouTube, I'm not sure that they actually have a person who goes and looks at it. They probably just check the actual text and say, well, that text is a violation. And the source of the text or the use of it doesn't matter. So anyway, the video is still up on Rumble, and you can find it there. So anybody who would want to see what I was actually saying at 3 minutes and 50 seconds into the podcast, please feel free to go look at it. But in any event, that's that story.
Sort of like that Charles Austin Beard quote, nowadays, when you say things that our forefathers said about the revolution, you're treated as a radical. And uh, uh, I can't remember exactly how he put it. Um, but that's kind of when you're quoting within a legal opinion quotes from George Washington and you're getting banned. That's oh yeah, dangerous citizen. You are now deemed a dangerous citizen.
You know, have you? I'm sure that you have, or at least you have some familiarity with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh yeah, lots of.
Okay, so at the end of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they come aboard this ship. It's an Ark ship, and it contains, like, all of the useless people from a society that were supposed to be sent off to prepare a new world for the rest of the fleet to come and get it. And they're all at one point, the captain is saying, there was a reason they sent us first, but I don't really remember what it was. It was so long ago. And
Right.
and they ask him questions and he can't answer. Nobody can answer. They're all idiots. And finally, one of the main characters says, "You're all a bunch of useless bloody ninnies." And the captain goes, "Ah, yes, that was it. That was the reason." It was Gauga-Frenchen Ark Fleet Ship B. And one of the most depressing things in my lifetime has been watching our entire culture turned into Gauga-Frenchen Ark Ship Fleet B, or Ark Fleet Ship B.
Yeah, that was. I mean, we as Americans and Europeans are seeing this as well. Australians, Canadians, really the entire Western world is seeing the normal citizens who are deemed nincompoops and not capable of making their own decisions being swapped out for migrants. I mean, that's what's going on. They need a more compliant electorate.
Yeah, well, it's worse and even more pernicious than that. Somebody came up with an article that Leanna Wen wrote back in 2020 about COVID and the protests.
Dr. Leanna Wen.
Yeah, Dr. Leanna S. Wen. And she said there's one key difference between social justice protests and Trump rallies. Those attending BLM protests, by and large, grasp the danger and are motivated to reduce their risk, while a large share of those attending the Trump rallies deny that there's a danger at all. You see, we're allowed to protest because we're the smart, pretty people. You all, the rubes and hayseeds, well, you can't really be trusted to run your own lives. You just don't have the level of sophistication necessary to make the decisions that are in your best interests, as I perceive them.
Right. I'd love to give you back your money, but I'm not sure you'd spend it in the right way.
Yeah, I just don't know you'd spend it right. I've worked harder than I ever have before to give you a middle-class tax cut. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. But yeah, this is just, it's just another indication of how far we are sliding back from anything that I could recognize as any sort of traditional American understanding of basic fairness and decency.
Yeah. And civility.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, civility is getting crushed, absolutely crushed.
Well, see, here's
civilization is being attacked at its core.
Here's the thing. These terms of service are, if you ask them, designed to preserve civility.
Yeah. Well,
and look, civility
they like.
Civility is important, but it's only important up to the point that it doesn't interfere with the statement of what you believe to be true. And
what you want everybody else to believe is true.
But redefining civility to mean, well, saying things that I believe, but not other things. Well, that's not civility. That's censorship. And
Right.
imposing censorship in the name of civility is a kind of subversion of civility that I find it very interesting. So anyway, that's the update. We'll move along from that. So let's talk about the one thing that, boy, people love it whenever we talk about, and that's monetary policy. Because everybody loves talking about monetary policy. And the thing I wanted to talk about is this clip here. Now, this is Jared Bernstein. Jared Bernstein is the chief of the President's Council or the chair of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Now, there are these people who are making a documentary on modern monetary theory, with the point of the documentary being why it's so good and why traditional monetary theory is just a bunch of BS. And so they managed to get a sit down with Jared Bernstein and ask him some questions. Now, I will point out that Jared Bernstein is not, as far as I know, a MMT guy, but they asked him to explain this. Well, why am I talking about it? Let's just listen. Let's just listen to Jared Bernstein and this. It's a 1 minute and 41-second clip of this documentary that they released back on the 2nd.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Now.
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So, I don't think there's anything confusing there.
Well, you couldn't prove it by your response. Now, to be fair to Jared Bernstein, he was talking about MMT, and he did say their concepts are a bit confusing. So he doesn't fully understand MMT. And why would he? His undergraduate degree is in music. What we have now. Yeah, his undergraduate degree is in music. His master's degree is in social work. So I will say that he is, how do I put this delicately, uniquely qualified to be the chief of the President's Council of Economic Advisors.
Absolutely.
He has unique qualifications for the job. Let's just put it that way. Not uniquely good, but certainly unique. But this whole MMT idea, an idea that, by the way, the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, said is just nonsense. To quote him, it's nonsense. And I find it interesting.
And yet, who was the big proponent of it? The French guy who wrote that book like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, Bernard somebody, I think. It got like all the rage.
I keep wanting to say Bernard Henri Lévy, but I don't know that that's true.
No, that's not it. But you know what I'm talking about. That book that was like all the rage, and it was basically MMT. And I've had conversations with these MMT people, and they really don't get the concept of inflation. They don't seem to understand how that works.
Well,
Despite numerous historical examples you can give them, they still don't really get it. They don't understand what happened with Venezuela. They don't understand what happened with Zimbabwe. They don't understand what happened with Germany. I mean, they really just don't get it.
well, we can go back further than that. We can go back to Spain in the 16th and 17th centuries, with all the money gold they were bringing in from the New World. I mean,
Yeah.
and that was a hard currency. Nobody was printing fiat
Right.
money then. They were
Yes.
just shipping boatloads of gold back to Spain and spending it on stuff, increasing the money supply of gold in Europe, infecting a lot of Europe with inflation. I mean,
That's right.
as Paul Krugman has said so many times, inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. Inflation is
One of the times he was absolutely correct.
Inflation is a monetary problem. It always is.
That's right. That's Milton Friedman.
The one thing about what Bernstein said here is that the government prints money and the government borrows money. Well, that's sort of true.
Yeah.
The Fed can increase or decrease the money supply, and the Fed tends to increase the money supply. The government, via appropriations made by Congress, uses the Treasury Department to sell bonds, to borrow money to pay for those appropriations. Those things are happening in a vacuum with respect to each other. Nobody is telling the Fed how much money to create, at least theoretically. And Congress is telling the Treasury how much money to borrow. But there's no direct linkage between the Fed increasing the money supply, or what people would say is printing money, and Congress appropriating money that doesn't exist and forcing the Treasury to buy bonds to pay for those appropriations. Those two things are happening almost in a vacuum in respect to each other.
Yep.
Which I don't think a lot of people understand. I find it troubling that Joe Biden.
It's hard to understand, like, where the Fed fits in, because it's sort of a governmental body, but it's not. I mean, it is controlled by appointees from the executive branch, but it has no oversight from Congress. It has no oversight from the executive branch.
It is an independent entity whose governors are appointed by the president.
And so they I mean, of course they communicate with Congress and the president. They need to know about the budget, and they have to, I mean, I'm sure they're in touch with the Census Bureau too, to understand how many people are out there, and how much the money supply should be increased, retracted, whatever. Although I don't think that's happened in a really long time. So I mean, it is a little bit difficult. It's not straightforward. It's a little nuanced to understand. So I understand why a lot of people are
right. And so what you end up with on the right are the people who say, well, all of our money is created by a private bank. Well, no, the Fed is not.
Andrew Jackson would say that.
Yeah, Andrew Jackson would say that. But the Fed is not a private bank. And nobody gave Andrew Jackson a bunch of plus points for being an economic literate either. Although, damn fine man with a pistol, as history indicates. Mm-hmm. But I find it troubling that President Biden's chief economic advisor doesn't seem to even be able to explain how current monetary policy works, much less be able to provide, as we saw here, a coherent rebuttal of modern monetary theory.
Well, it also explains a lot, I think. Neither the Democrats or the Republicans, I mean, there are certainly some Republicans who have advocated and pushed for. I mean, Rand Paul comes to mind, and his father. I mean, they both pushed for auditing the Fed forever. And there are plenty of Republicans who recognize that when we bring in $4 trillion and then spend 6 to 7, we got to borrow that money. And they make that clear. In action, they still keep freaking funding it. So it's hard to say how much they really understand it. They seem to be much more concerned with just kicking the can down the road so it's somebody else's problem. And that's what we've been doing now for the last 40 years.
Here is, one of the fundamental problems with a fiat currency, less so with gold, although it has its own issues, as we found out in the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Is that, people complain that the Fed doesn't really have any oversight, to the point that people think it's some sort of private company that has no government oversight at all, rather than having a set of governors who are all appointed by the president for fixed terms.
And it has an IG.
And it does. However, the difficult question is, even if you were to provide oversight, who could you possibly trust to do it?
Right.
Because if you give it to Congress or to the president, it doesn't matter. If you give it to any political entity and give them direct oversight over the currency, you mentioned Venezuela and Germany and Brazil and many other countries.
Zimbabwe.
Yeah. If you give the government direct control over the currency, they will puff it up like a tick, because expanding the money supply will, all of the things being equal, provide the illusion of prosperity, as you are basically going to touch off inflation. Look, wages are up. Well, in nominal terms, sure, but not in real terms. Nobody wants to have a recession. So if the Fed were to come in and start lowering or raising interest rates, right, to slow down economic activity, to avoid inflation, first thing that Congress or the president would do is start putting pressure on them to not be as tight on monetary policy so that they don't cause a recession. And
so that they have money that they can buy votes with. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So every time you give politicians control of the money supply, it breaks. And look, I'm not even saying that the Fed is all as independent as we might think they are. Because if you look at the way the Fed's monetary policy and money and easing money supply coincides with general elections, you get a very interesting picture of how sensitive the Fed is to political pressure, even though technically the Fed is an independent agency.
Right.
Give that to politicians, and whatever independence they might have will simply be gone. At the same time, then, how do you have a money supply that you have no control over it, that's based on some objective standards? I mean, you could certainly do that, but if you do, you're going to have to give up basically control over money, which means giving up control over the business cycle. Mm-hmm. And what you'll end up with,
and you have like steeper declines, although quicker recoveries, but it can get really painful there for a while.
Sure, because we always think in terms of the Great Depression as how awful things can get.
Right.
I would invite you to look at the 19th century and the cycle of deep and very sharp recessions and depressions. There was, I believe, a Great Depression in the 1870s as well. And there were several scares in the end of and the first part of the end of the 19th and first part of the 20th century before the Fed was created.
The free silver movement grew out of that.
Yeah. So that doesn't seem like a great solution either.
Right.
Because you have no control over the money supply. If you look like back at the 1870s, that whole decade from 1870 to 1880 was a deflationary decade. Mm-hmm. Prices actually fell. Now, fortunately, we were industrializing and we were growing, and we were able to grow faster than the deflation could stop us.
And there was
from
the great
growing.
expansion west. There was the railroads. There were other things going on as well.
Yeah, there were a lot of externalities that were associated with that period, but it was a deflationary period for 10 years, where gold was actually worth more at the end of that 1880 than it was in 1870, and also at a time that we were finding gold and silver deposits out west.
Right.
So it's a real complex issue. But if you go back to the 1930s and you go back to the gold standard, where the dollar is tied to a specific amount of gold, well, then whenever you do international settlements, you've got to pony up the gold for those payments. If you're going to import BMWs or whatever, then the Germans are going to expect you to ship them gold bullion. And the problem that we ran into in the 1930s, the same problem that the Bank of London ran into, why they went to a fiat currency in the 1930s, was imports were so high that they were just dwindling the amount of gold that was available to the money. And we faced a real prospect of simply not having an ounce of gold left in Fort Knox or in the Bank of London. And that wasn't going to be a good thing. So money is way trickier than the MMT people give it credit for.
That's absolutely true. And again, they're just so fixated on the ability to print money that they have no cost benefit analysis. They don't understand that, yes, it's absolutely true that we could print our way out. That's what the Weimar Republic did, right? Actually, that's what the Germans did before to France in order to pay off their debts from World War I. They just inflated the currency, paid them off with green mail, and then we wiped out all the assets of our citizens, but
we also wiped out all of our debt.
Right.
Because once the Reichsmark hit, well, I think it was by 1922, the Reichsmark was somewhere like 23 billion to the dollar.
You get paid twice a day just because of the changes in the interest rates.
However, you can pay off those reparation payments, which were set in specific values. Not now, if the French had been smart, which nobody was at the time, but if they'd been smart, well, you know what? I will say this: the one person at the end of World War II or World War I who was smart was Woodrow Wilson, and I think his plan for peace after World War I probably would have worked and probably would have prevented the rise of Nazism, probably would have prevented World War II, but there was too much bad blood between the Europeans to ever even think about accepting his 20 points for peace, and what they ended up with was Versailles. And if they were going to impose those Versailles restrictions and penalties on Germany, they should have set them as a percentage of GDP, not in fixed amounts.
Right.
But because it was set in fixed amounts, the Germans could just inflate their way out of it. Which by the way,
what they did.
Which, by the way, would not surprise me if one of the primary inducements of MMT is just to inflate our way out of our current debt.
Yeah, and that's going to screw a lot of people, especially whoever's using that currency. And frankly, the lenders are not going to be terribly happy either, because they're going to be getting paid in a currency that is now devalued.
Exactly. So
almost useless to spend back in that country.
Well, not only that, but all of the loan contracts that, say, a bank has, whether cars, mortgages, whatever. I mean, those contracts were for a specific amount of money,
right? And
their way of trying to recoup that money plus make a profit is to impose a mortgage rate on it. So 6.5%, 7.5% on a car, 4 or 5% on a mortgage, whatever it might be. If you have massive inflation and you're devaluing the way that Argentina or Germany did, then that money is going to be worthless when they get it. But
Right.
the other people to whom it is going to be worthless is every granny and grampy who bought treasury bonds because they were going to, they put all their money into treasury bonds and they were going to live off the coupon payments from their treasury bonds. Well, those payments are worthless.
Right.
And people who've put, money into savings, not that Americans do that, but people who have money in savings, that's worthless. Your savings account just
Well, and then
becomes
you
a
could
set
even
of
try to
numbers.
sell the bonds, but you're going to be getting a yield. The yield that's going to be expected is going to be exorbitant, and you're not even going to get anywhere close to what you paid for the bond.
Right, because you bought a bond. Let's say you bought it at par because, I don't want to do the math in my head. But let's say that you bought it at par. Well, for a 30-year, that's a $10,000 payment per bond, right? That's the minimum face value of a 30-year bond. It's $10,000. Okay, well, if you bought that at 5% interest, and now you want to sell it, and inflation is running at 40%, you're going to have to sell that bond for that 40%, premium yield to just cover inflation alone. It is going to cost you $4,000 on what you'll get back for it. And then, of course, there's the, you paid 10. Now you're going to sell it for 6, but it's actually going to be less than 6 because they're going to want their premium over and above just covering inflation as well. So now you're probably down to $5,500, $5,000. You're going to take a 50% haircut on that bond, or worse, if inflation goes even higher. I mean, it just wipes out everyone's savings. Everyone starts back at status quo ante if you can ever get that inflation back under control again.
Yeah. Or until the economy collapses, then everybody's out.
Yeah. So MMT, not a great idea. And the number of people who fall for it never ceases to amaze me. Moving on. Apparently, the word has gone out that it is okay to criticize the Biden administration now. And it's okay to, apparently uncover who's actually paying for all of these Hamas protests. And they're all Biden backers. There's the Tides Foundation, and Politico just lays it all out. Tides Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund,
Pritzker.
Yeah, the Pritzkers, the Hyatt Hotel Empire. All of them are supporting these protests. And I thought it was very interesting. I was looking at Colombia, and they set up that tent city with basically 100 identical tents. They have, printed.
Matter of fact, they're pretty much the same tents at every college.
Yeah, because they're all being funded by these left-wing donors, which, I think it's interesting because Joe Biden, about which more in due course, has largely been, at least saying things against these protests while his major donors are funding it. I don't know. If I was conspiratorial about this, I might think that this is yet more pressure to either get Joe Biden to change policy, to move left, or if he does not, to withdraw that support and find somebody else.
I'm glad that people have started to actually look at the funding of these things. And I'm impressed that Politico was one of the ones that did it. It's so important to understand how non-grassroots these things are. Mayor Eric Adams was complaining about Colombia and saying, it's almost all outside agitators. It's not the students who are really doing this. And largely he's been proven correct. My understanding is
that the majority of people arrested at these protests are not associated with the universities at which the protests are occurring.
That's the same as my understanding. And that's a big deal. And that starts to uncover. People still don't realize that like the SDS and like all the activists back in the 60s were funded largely by the USSR and sympathizers. They weren't grassroots either. I mean, yeah, there were plenty of hippies around who were like, fuck the man, and trying to get laid with hippie chicks, which I understand. that's a noble pursuit. But it was a large part of the movement had been financed and pushed by outside sources. Just like the Green Movement is mostly funded by Russia, Qatar, even Saudi Arabia. It's in their interests to see the United States and Great Britain, Norway, cut back on their oil producing and selling and using, because it raises prices for these big oil producers. So they have no problems funding the green revolution, which we've always called the watermelon,
Yeah,
green on the outside, red underneath.
And that's the fundamental disconnect in terms of public understanding of these things, which is that the public story is that this is all some sort of spontaneous grassroots movement.
Right.
That is sort of springing up everywhere because of their, hatred of injustice and whatever it is. But that's not what it is. This is largely a movement that is funded by activists for whatever reason. And
we know the reason.
Well, yeah, we know the reasons. But these college kids are, as many college kids are, generation to generation, useful idiots for these activists.
And they've been primed to behave this way by the universities themselves.
Sure,
I mean, what this really shows us is the rot at the core of academia in this nation and elsewhere.
Yes, because
anything about their nation.
So many of these professors are fully on board with this activism.
Yeah, that's right. They've been joining them.
And they are encouraging and fomenting it intentionally. And, no matter how smart these kids are at Harvard or whatever other elite universities they may be, their life experience does not prepare them for this sort of sophisticated, propagandized manipulation.
Have any of them actually taken a comparative government class? Have any of them taken an economics class? Have any of them taken an American history class, a Western Civ class?
Well,
largely,
first of all, nobody's going to
the answer is going to be no.
Yeah, nobody's going to be taking a Western Civ class, my friend, because that's not a choice field or preferred field of study by university administrators. In fact, there are many universities that are, killing
Stanford
Western
banned
Civ.
it back in the 90s.
Yeah, it's just
Stanford, one of the best schools in the nation, in the world.
Yes, but it's not a favored subject. But there are plenty of gender studies and race studies subjects that they want people to take. And you talk about, haven't they taken a course in economics? Yeah, sure, they probably have. Probably taught by a professor who's teaching them MMT, because that's where MMT has its largest base of intellectual support, which is from universities.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Because,
and I mean, that's, if you want to understand how to stop this problem. And it's interesting that in some of the red states, specifically like Florida and Texas, like Ben Sass just came out the other day, and I guess he's the head of, not University of Florida, but is it the new school? I can't remember. He's head of some state university in Florida.
Correct.
And he basically said, look, this isn't a daycare. You come here to wrestle with ideas, not with people. You are absolutely, we're going to protect your right to assemble and to free speech. But if you cross the line, you're going to be held accountable. You're adults. You're going to be held accountable as an adult. You've got your space. You've got your time. Use it however you see fit. But once you cross the line, that's it. You're getting treated like an adult. And we're going to probably expel you or suspend you.
Well, one of the interesting things is that these encampments on these college campuses, they're setting them up as if they were independent fiefdoms and saying,
Right.
we have our rights. Well, yes, you do. But you know what one of your rights isn't? Appropriating property that doesn't belong to you.
Right.
And
Much
treating
less
it as if you're
preventing other students from attending class,
or graduation or anything.
violating Title VII and Title VI by inhibiting people from exercising their own civil rights. No, you don't have that ability. And the university should be held directly responsible for that.
And look, the one thing that we can say about the anti-war protests in the 1960s is that these kids were subject to being drafted and sent over into combat.
They had skin in the game.
Yeah, they had skin. They had literal skin in the game. I'm not sure what skin in the game Queers for Palestine have.
Well, I don't think they want to find out what skin they have in that game. It's just nonsensical. But that, again, when I said we know what it's actually about, it's about the revolution. This is no different than it has been for the last 60 years. This is communist agitation, revolutionary agitation. They put a new skin on top of it. Every time they try it, socialism, progressivism. Now we're going to do it under Islamism. We're going to do it under anti-capitalism, whatever it is. It's Marxist propaganda. It's Marxist indoctrination, and it leads to the same place every single time. No, there has never been a successful Marxist revolution ever.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Some would say that the October Revolution was a successful Marxist revolution, so I'm not sure what you're...
It was a successful revolution, but it wasn't a successful a government afterwards. It was a very flawed,
right?
Like Cuba, Venezuela, Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it turns into a police state.
Right. Every single time. Romania, a bunch of Eastern Europe, every single time. Iran. Iran in 1979 was assisted by Russia to have their Iranian revolution, their Islamic revolution, because they espoused Marxist beliefs and they practiced those within the sleeve of Islamic indoctrination. The reason that Hamas has been kicked out of every Arab country they ever tried to settle in or were refugees in is because they foment Marxist revolutionary activities and rhetoric. That's why nobody in the Middle East will take Hamas or Palestinian refugees, because they know what trouble they bring.
Yes, well, when Yasser Arafat basically tried to take over Jordan in the 1960s,
right.
The Jordanians just went in and slaughtered thousands. In fact, we don't know how many thousands were actually killed by the Jordanian armed forces. And if you look at the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, and remember,
it's very fortified.
The Gaza Strip technically is Egyptian territory.
Right.
But Egypt has that thing walled off every bit as effectively as the Israelis do.
Even more so. They've got a serious compound there.
And when you look at countries where...
And then the Palestinians in Jordan are still refugees. They've been refugees since what, 1976? Or 1967, actually.
Yeah.
They've been refugees there. They're not allowed to become Jordanian citizens.
Well, actually, it goes back even further than that. It really does go back to 1948. And the refugee problem, which at this point is now 60 years old, is a useful cudgel with which to beat the Israelis.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the Palestinians are the tip of the spear. And they have been steeped in this death ideology, and that they are pawns to be used by Allah to inflict pain and suffering on Israel and all Jews.
Yes,
and they willingly accept that.
But all of the other Arab countries also know that now that they have crafted this tool, they can't afford to give it the freedom to operate in their countries.
Yeah. The Columbia professors and Harvard professors and so on did not figure that out. They kept the maniacs they created within the system.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. And like you said, I'm a little surprised that it was Politico who actually came up with this story.
I'm very surprised
about, who was funding these protests, and, they're funding it to the tune of many, many, many dollars. And if you think,
I hope they get sued. I really hope that somebody goes after them and sues them for violation of civil rights. Any one of these Jewish kids at these campuses should have a lawyer and a Title VI, Title VII lawsuit ready to run against not only the oppressors, but the ones who funded them and funded them for a specific purpose of oppressing Jews.
Yeah, well, there's that, but as nice as it would be to see, Bill Gates fined billions of dollars, over and above that, the university administrations have to be punished.
Yeah. Why are we, Elon Musk brought up, it doesn't make any sense that we're spending, billions and billions of dollars on these schools who have huge endowments, by the way. We're spending federal tax dollars to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars every year to support anti-American and anti-Israel systems.
In schools that have multi-billion-dollar endowments.
Yeah. Seize the endowments.
Yeah, well,
I mean, that's draconian. I understand. Yeah. I don't know that I would necessarily support that, but I do want to punish them.
Yeah, the administrators need to be punished, and it's not going to be one president here and one there who just has to resign.
This is going to take a long rooting out,
and then they get replaced by largely a facsimile.
Right.
And look, we should have seen that this was going to be a problem when Larry Summers got fired at Harvard.
Yeah, for saying, well, but don't we see that on this? We got tails on the distribution of intelligence and whatever. I mean, could that have something to do with it? Oh,
that's a forbidden topic at the university. That. Yep, and he lost his job. So everybody should have woken up then, but they haven't. And I'm not sure that most people are waking up now. But it is nice to see.
I don't know. It seems like there is some waking up. I've been watching some of these clips of the counter protesters, and it's interesting that the frat bros are getting lots of love.
Yeah, go on. I think one group went and broke in and put up an American flag, and they were being attacked, and they're getting into some legal trouble over that. So they've got like a $400,000 GoFundMe running right now. So good for them.
It's heartening to see that the normals, as Kurt Schlichter would say, or the normies, are fighting back and say, you know what, not on my campus, and no, not in America. This is USA. You don't like it, leave.
The problem is that the squeaky wheel always gets the grease. And the normies...
And they are very squeaky, but they're not large in number.
Yeah, and the normies don't realize, because the minority here, which is a fairly small minority, is so loud and so vocal, and also has largely control of the institution itself, that the normies often just think, I got to keep my head down, because the entire system is against me. Well, maybe not, but it certainly takes a bit of bravery to stand up to the point where you can start kicking off a preference cascade among the normies to say, nah, we're not going to put up with it anymore.
Yeah. But if you're going to have a battle, you have to engage the enemy. And there's no other way. They're not going to tire themselves out. They are not going to, this isn't a phase. It's a systematic process that has been going on since the 50s, if not earlier. And it's not going to stop ever.
Yeah,
They
but
will
it is
always have more demands.
But it is asymmetrical in the sense
Yeah.
that they don't really have anything to lose. Right?
Mhm.
The people who are on the protest side, they realize that whatever penalties might get applied to them will probably be fairly minor. And normal people assume that the penalties that apply to them will be far more major and have far more effect on their future life. So
Yeah, and that's true. Well, until recently, there's been a bit more pushback on that. Actual suspensions, actual expulsions. Sorry, kid, but you know what? You did it to yourself. You made bad choices. This is what happens. You're young. You've got time to, change your ways, but you're not going to do it on the back of this institution. And I think that's the way to go.
Yeah,
Actually punish these people.
I think one of the funniest clips was it was some college more in the middle of the country. And no, actually, I think it was in New York. I think it was in Columbia. NYPD came in and started arresting people. And this one woman was objecting and getting in their faces. And so they just grabbed her, tossed her to the ground and started handcuffing her. And the only thing she could think of to yell at them was, "I'm a professor. I'm a professor." Yeah, well.
Wait, are you tenured?
Yeah, I have tenure. How dare you touch me? No one at the university would touch me. The trouble with academics is that they live in, especially tenured full-time professors, they really do live in a special world. And the rules of that world don't apply to the outside.
How many of these people
world.
deserve to actually be professors? That's the other thing where like the plagiarism, eye-opening has been happening. Most of these people have no business being a professor at all, not even close. They have no actual specialized skill. The reason they have a PhD is because they stole other people's work. They don't have an original idea.
They don't publish. They don't.
No.
They don't have any, they don't do research. They don't do any economic. And to the extent that they do publish, and look, Claudine Gray, who in 20 years as an academic has published 11 papers.
Yeah. And almost all of them were plagiarized.
Yeah. I mean, technically, that would get you tossed out of any decent physics department anywhere in the country. You just don't have enough intellectual output to justify keeping you there. But here's the thing, in the social sciences, and by the way, that's where the vast majority of the activists come from, is out of the social sciences, where the standards are a bit different. And look, they hate it when you point that out. There were those professors who were basically tossed out of their schools for academic fraud because they just published a bunch of non sequiturs in a journal. Got peer-reviewed, passed peer-reviewed, got published, and it was just a bunch of nonsense. And when, of course, they announced that, yes, this doesn't exist, this research never occurred, it doesn't make any sense, there are entire paragraphs that mean literally nothing. They're just repetitions of these acceptable phrases in the social sciences. And immediately,
it's coded language.
Yeah, you've committed academic fraud. No, the people who are committing academic fraud are the people who are publishing this stuff as if it was real academic output. But again, normies always have something to lose. It's either your career or at your school, it's tenure. You always have something to lose.
Yeah.
And if you get arrested, even if you get expelled from Columbia because you participated in this protest, I suspect there's an excellent chance that that expulsion will be overturned in fairly short order when everything dies down, or another school will just gladly accept you. And so there may be some inconvenience associated with it.
But there's no real consequence.
But no real consequence. And that, I think, is...
And that's a big problem. We've raised now 2 generations of kids who don't understand consequences. And that's a really, really, I mean, bad thing, obviously. It reminds me of the old saw, hard times make hard men make good times make weak men make hard times. I mean, and we're in the cycle of weak men making hard times right now.
Yeah. Well, anyway, speaking of universities, thanks to the Biden administration, are now about to get an update to their Title IX protections. Maybe because the Biden administration has come out with new Title IX rules. I think there's been a lot of assumption that these rules would be worse than they actually were, but they are bad enough so that once they unveiled their changes to Title IX, 15 Republican-controlled states sued the Department of Education to argue that these new regulations are plainly illegal and undermine protections meant for, and I love how they managed to stick that word in there.
Yeah, right.
Cisgender students.
We've never used the language of the enemy. That's just dumb.
Yeah, well, this is the Hill. So
this is the Hill, yeah. So okay.
It is
they
the
are
enemy.
the enemy.
So this is going to be going on, let's see, where are we at? Louisiana, Montana, Idaho, Mississippi, Texas, and there are others that are coming, which are going to take us.
Virginia is. Yeah, Virginia's definitely down with that.
Yeah, that's going to take us across multiple circuits of the federal courts.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the Ninth Circuit is going to say these rules are perfectly fine.
Right.
And the Fifth Circuit is going to say,
so you're guaranteed to get a court split between the circuits.
And the Fifth Circuit
is
going to
say, force the Supreme Court review.
Yeah, because the Fifth Circuit's going to say this is a bunch of bullshit, and it's going to have to go to the Supreme Court. And as one of the people said, if you're the federal government, you're going to have to beat every single one of these lawsuits to win. Because a loss in any circuit, and they'll put an injunction on the federal government from enforcing it.
And it should be shut down. It completely upended the whole purpose of Title IX. And the thing is, I was not ever for Title IX to begin with, because it robbed, especially smaller schools, of things like wrestling programs for men, because they just didn't have enough money to be able to support, full teams for every gender. And a lot of times they didn't even have the people to fill the women side of it, and they get dinged for that. But
right. So the best thing to do is just to
rewrite.
The best thing to do is just to kill that sport at the university. That way, there's no problem. If you don't,
that's exactly what happened. Yeah. Although I'm perfectly happy to see women's sports coming up. I mean, I've never been against women's sports. I like a lot of women's sports, but it's not the same as men's, and that's okay. But either way, this rewriting almost eliminates protections for women. I mean, it does eliminate protections for women. It denudes the whole concept of Title IX, which was fairness for women. And now we have an administration that doesn't even know what a woman is, unless we're talking about abortion. And they just literally screw all these young girls. Absolutely screw them over 100%. Absolutely awful.
It's not that the administration doesn't know what woman is. It's just that they're redefining a woman to be anyone who says they're a woman.
Wow. What's her name? Jackson, Justice Jackson, Brown Jackson. She doesn't know what a woman is.
Yeah. Well, and again, especially when you're talking about college campuses, which gets us back to the ideological capture that our institutions, certainly our educational institutions, have gone through. which is that if you're a woman athlete at the school, it's not really safe to speak out. I mean, look, let's take someone like Riley Gaines, right? The female swimmer, who did speak out, you know, when she was a senior and after she left college. But speaking out before that, again, you have something to lose.
Yeah, there were a bunch of women at UPenn with Thompson, Leah, whatever her name, its name is, who spoke out to the administration, and they got dinged. I mean, they didn't get kicked off or anything like that, but they got warned that they're not allowed to bring that up anymore. And that's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And by the way, there was a not so subtle implication that if you continue to bring it up, you'll just be, at the very least, tossed off the swim team. And
they're going to, alert your future employers. You're going to have, your permanent record. That's screwed with. I mean, they threaten these poor girls. And these guys are losers. They can't make it at their own level. So they go and poach. I mean, that's like me joining, the CYA to play basketball against a bunch of 12-year-olds. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah, but you could be a basketball star.
That could be. I'd actually be really good.
It's like the joke from the old Ron and Fez radio show, the running gag. How many 5-year-olds could you beat up at one time?
I don't even know karate, and I can kill like 30.
Yeah, exactly. Or as the that also reminds me of is it The Guardian or the Mirror in England ran a poll. I think it was either the Guardian or the Daily Mail, actually, that ran a poll among men, both in Europe and in the United States.
That sounds more like the Daily Mail.
About, how likely is it that you think you would be able to, if you were unarmed, defeat a bear that was attacking you? And Americans, like 75% of Americans said, "Oh yeah, I could kick a bear's ass."
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that may be.
I've been thinking about this since I was 5. I've got it down.
That may be a little over optimistic. But speaking of being able to defeat animals, Kristi Noem remains the gift who keeps on giving.
So, all right, that has to go down in Q&O history. That's the best segue ever.
Kristi Noem, who is still explaining more than a week later about why she was right to kill that puppy, has now switched to attacking the Biden administration, saying that Commander, the Biden family's German Shepherd that bit 24 agents, well, Joe Biden can't make the hard decisions because he should have shot that German Shepherd too. So she has a really high standard for dogs. Let's just put it that way.
Somebody should take to mind that the old saw that if you're explaining, you're losing.
Yeah. Oh,
and she's out there. It's a good thing she's pretty.
Here was the money quote. So how many people is enough people to be attacked and dangerously hurt before you make a decision on a dog? And
oh my God.
Obviously, making a decision means something very specific to Kristi Noem.
It's definitely different in the hunting world than in the just dog owner world. But I don't know if it's that different.
How does she, I think the thing, and watching her, and she's had to talk about this every day,
incessantly.
Which, by the way, I think means her political career is largely over. I mean, she largely ended it herself.
Yeah, you don't fuck with dogs. Nobody's going to vote for you.
What level of what level of lack of understanding does it take to not grasp a very basic idea that there is no context in which talking about killing a dog is going to resonate well with the electorate. I mean, there is the one outlier case, the old Yeller case, right?
Sure.
My dog saved me from wolves, but they gave him rabies. And
Right.
once he had rabies, there was nothing to do. We had to have him put to sleep. That's a sympathy thing. He had a good dog. He was a good boy, and he got rabies. And we understand. And of course, you play up on the angle of, how many tears your family cried when you had to go out and back and shoot old Yeller. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, there is just no, especially nowadays, this is not, 1873 where if I have a bad dog,
Right.
I have to
It would have
shoot
made
him
sense.
because
your dog was an important part. All your dogs were an actually important part of your ecosystem because they helped you hunt. They helped protect your land. They helped protect against intruders. They had jobs and they knew what their jobs were. It's a little different when.
Well, also, you didn't have the local shelter. You didn't have
Right.
Training and rehoming and all of the. There are too many options, even if you have a bad dog. And look, some dogs can be bad. I will accept that.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. I mean, there may be genetic problems, mental disorders. Dogs are mammals. They have mental disorders. Yep. Sometimes a dog is not salvageable, but I would say probably a good 99% of the time,
I would think that
you could
they if they're given to the right family, given to the right space, they actually can thrive. Now they may not thrive as a hunting dog, and that's fine, but they can still be a good companion. They can be a good help. Maybe they can help a blind person. I don't know. I mean, there are lots of other uses that a dog can be put to and be put in a caring, loving environment.
Yeah, there are plenty of options today. This is not 100 years ago. So there's just, it's just the weirdest story. There's no way to explain.
And she shot herself in the foot. She put it in her damn book. And I think that she just misunderstood. She was trying to look tough. How she makes hard decisions.
Well,
And I
that's what
can
it is.
understand that was a hard decision, but her lack of sympathy and the obvious anger at this dog for not doing what I was supposed to do.
Well, but look, she has said things since then that don't make sense based on the story she originally told. Because now it has gone from, it tried to snap at me to it was snapping at my children. And yet her original story, after she went and shot the dog, she came home and the kids were like, "Where's the puppy?"
Yeah, it won't hunt.
So the kids didn't seem to be as concerned for their own safety as she was. The kids apparently had a different opinion towards it. So it's just a weird story. But look, if you're going to say I make hard decisions, that context is, look, let me tell you, I can make hard decisions. I can make the tough choices. Let me tell you about the time I shot a puppy. That's never gonna be a good look for you.
That should just be right out. No funny hats. Don't wear funny hats. Don't talk about killing animals.
Oh, by the way, in chat, Cujo was not salvageable. Other than that, no good.
Cujo was not salvageable.
I would point out that Cujo had rabies.
Was rabid. Yes, he was rabid.
So he was not salvageable. So Cujo falls within the old Yeller
very slim parameters.
Yes. That's a very narrow circumstance. Once you get rabies in the picture, all bets are off because everybody knows that rabies is inevitably fatal and highly transmissible from a rabid dog. So,
or
rabies,
any animal.
Rabies doesn't count. But no. Possums. Possums are almost immune to rabies.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Their body temperature is too low for the virus to survive.
I hate possums.
Yeah, possums run a body temperature somewhere in the upper 80s.
That's how they're able to play dead so well.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but I do know that the rabies
I've
virus.
seen it.
The rabies virus. Well, no, I have seen it. I've seen opossums do that. I don't know if their lower body temperature is why they can do that. But I also know
right?
the rabies virus just can't survive when your body temperature is like running 89. They have to have a temperature above 90 something, or they just all die. So
so it doesn't, but it raises the temperature in people and animals who get it because you get a fever.
correct, yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but they can't survive at low temperatures, and opossums have very low body temperatures, and so thus they're largely immune to rabies.
All right, so I'm not worried about getting rabies from possum. Okay, good.
No, you're not.
I hate them, but
In fact, I don't know why you hate possums. I mean, they kill pests.
I don't like them. They're snivelly little creatures. I've had bad experiences with possums. I don't like them.
Okay, Kristi, fine. Well, we'll get you for your. We'll accept your hatred of America's only native marsupial. So apparently, you just don't like.
Go to Australia, stupid possum.
Well, look, Michael, as always, a pleasure. Thanks for joining me, as always, and I'll look forward to talking to you again next time.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
You too. All right, everybody. Well, you have been watching the Observations podcast for Sunday, the 5th of May, 2024. As always, appreciate the fact that you watched the podcast with us, and we hope you'll be with us again next time. Until then, have a great week. So long.